And we're back to Kerbal Space Program. So, last episode, we went over the parts. And the episode before that, we did kind of an introduction. So, this episode, I'm going to go over the process of building a rocket, a basic rocket, and then probably maybe a medium-sized rocket. So this is going to be in the vehicle assembly building. And probably in future episodes, I'll be fast forwarding through the construction of rockets. And then when we do planes, or when we, the first episode or two that we build planes, I'll be doing that without being sped up. And I'll walk through each process each step in making a plane. And then, which I kind of did in the first episode. And then future episodes of that, when building planes and rockets, the construction will be sped up just to save time, because otherwise episodes could be maybe 2 hours long and I'd have like no commentary to even talk about. Maybe eventually I might do that, but for now we'll stick to that plan. So to build a basic rocket, you're going to want your command module. So the command pod Mark 1 is usually a good one to start at. It's one-manned. It's got you can place stuff on the top, like a parachute or whatever, and you can build below it as well. So it's kind of the, basically, it's the basic 1 meter rocket size command pod. So after we have our pod, which we have, under propulsion, or you have all your different types of fuels and engines and whatever, but you can't just put fuel underneath it. You need the coupler first. But for the sake of this, let's just say you have a parachute and a solid rocket booster, or a command pod and a solid rocket booster. And I'm not going to name it or anything. Oh, and under flags, I did try to import. Yeah, I imported the image for the this series, and so now we can have that flag. It's got the image, if you recognize it. So I'm going to do that. Okay. And we'll launch this rocket. So this is the launch pad. You got your flag. Our plane is still there from last episode. You got your water tower, your fuels. I think this one's oxidizer and this one's fuel. I think. I don't know, but that's irrelevant. So we have Bob Kerman down here. He's anxious, I guess. So we have one stage, which is just a rocket. And our controls are the same with the plane, though you begin facing straight upward, opposed to at 90-degree horizontally. So solid rocket boosters do not have nozzle or power adjustments, so it's either 100% or it's off. So you don't have to use shifting control and X to change your throttle. So you just begin by pressing spacebar. It begins the next stage. There's a small computer guidance system in the command module, so I'll turn on SAS and I'll begin the flight. So here you see we're already at 150 meters per second, 200 meters per second. The nozzle gets hotter. You can see the fuel running out down there. It's about to overheat, although I think we'll run out of fuel before we overheat. If we go to resources, you can see the solid fuel is running down, and you see a Mach cone forming around the rocket. Mach cone is the air is being compressed so much when you are moving at the speed of sound or higher. So we've reached 15 kilometers and we'll soon be heading back down again. Bob is uneasy, really. So we're at 18 kilometers, so we're going up. We went up 3 kilometers without any power, now 4 kilometers without power, and 5 kilometers without any power. We see we're still going at 100 meters per second, or decelerating. Although we are still going upward, we are decelerating upward, so we're going slower and slower, and we're about to reach our peak at 20 kilometers, and now we're falling downward. This neon green triangle shaped circle is the retrograde motion, which is what, if you point at that circle, or triangle circle thing, then you're pointing away from your velocity. This orange bar and dot in the center is the way that you're pointing. And then there's the yellow circle, which I can, just using WASD, Q, and E keys, I can go the other way. This yellow circle kind of looks like a plane. It's got a horizontal bar and a half of a vertical bar. That's your prograde, which means you're pointing the way that you're falling if your orange cursor that you can see here is over the yellow. So this is prograde, pointing the way that your velocity is, and retrograde, pointing away from your velocity. So I'll be using that terminology in future episodes and when making orbits and calculations and trajectories, etc. Solid fuel rockets, as I was saying before, don't require oxidizer, so you can fit quite a bit more thrust in the rockets, but their downside is that they're, one, not very effective in vacuums, such as space, and so right now we're falling at 100 meters per second, and we're actually decelerating because of the terminal velocity. There's so much air in our path that's slowing us down. We're about to crash. And explosion. Boom. It's not very big of an explosion, but it's good enough. Right here, there's a memorial for the. It's just kind of a in-game. Sorry. I guess you could say Easter egg. It's for the old command pod, which they got rid of in I believe update 16.16, and they replaced it with other command modules. So they just have an Easter egg memorial. So you can go to the vehicle assembly building. So that was a manned flight with solid rocket booster. So the downside of solid rocket boosters, although they're very effective in atmospheres, and they are quite light relatively, and do not have oxidizers, so you can fit more fuel in the same area. They don't work very well in vacuums, or they don't work as well as long exposures of other engines. For example, the normal liquid fuel engine with gimbal, if you had this one on full power and this one on full power in space, the solid rocket booster would still be more powerful. However, it had to be at full power, and you wouldn't be able to you wouldn't be able to turn it off or degrade the power. You wouldn't have control. It's non-gimbling, etc. It's not ideal for space. It's better to have controllable resources than using solid rocket boosters. However, solid rocket boosters are used when, in the early stages, usually the first stage, when lifting the rocket off the ground and for the 15 or so kilometers into the air. So now we'll begin with a bit more advanced rocket. So that it blew up when it came down. Didn't have a parachute. It wasn't slow enough falling, so it just blew up, and the crew member died. And you don't want that, because what if you're landing on another planet or satellite or moon or whatever, and you're coming in for landing and you don't have a parachute? Granted, that would be on a planet that has air that you could use a parachute for. So once you have your command module, you want to go to Utilities, and there's these 4 parachutes. There's an MK25, which is a Rockomax drag chute. Drag chutes are used in high atmosphere conditions. See, Rockomax. So with Rockomax command modules, the top portion where you put your parachute is the size of a 1 meter. The bottom part of a probe is the top is the size of the top size of a of a 1 meter. So they can fit together quite easily. So if I went to pods, or no, if I took the Rockomax pod, it would fit very well on top because it's the same size. And then if you took a probe part, put that on top, it would fit well as well. So that's what I mean. I'm not going to say, I will most likely not say Iodyne. I'll probably just say probe parts, something like that, probe, because it's just quicker, easier, and easier to understand. So under your utilities, the parachutes, you have your Rockomax drag chutes, which are used in high atmospheres when there's hardly any air. They're very large, and they're just used for slowing it down enough for and they're just enough for you to engage the normal parachutes. This is a Rockomax normal parachute without ripping the parachute cords. So you're moving slow enough to not have a sudden impulse of force ripping your parachute off and sending you crashing down. There's radial parachutes, which I guess you would use if you want to recover parts and you can't put anything on the top of the parts. And then there's the normal MK16 1 meter parachute. So that fits nicely on the command module. And then under structural, you're going to want a decoupler or a separator. As I said in the previous episode, separators, they will, if I had, say, these parts, this separator is going to eject that, and the separator will be left behind. However, if you have a stack decoupler, which, by the way, aesthetically looks nicer, I feel, it will separate just what's below the command module. So this will stick to the part below. But if you want to separate 2 parts, because you have 2 command modules, like this, then this will stick to that module, and you don't want that. So that's when you would use a separator. So now that you have your decoupler, you want to take the basic liquid fuel tank and a basic 1 meter. Well, that's 1 meter liquid fuel tank. Basic 1 meter liquid fuel engine. So there's your non-vectoring, your vectoring, and then your, small and vectoring engine. So if I were to use this, it'd be it doesn't look very well proportioned. It seems a little too tall. You don't need that much power to lift off this small of a rocket. So you could just use a small rocket or engine to pick it up, to provide enough thrust. And you'll probably want this is a stability enhancer. It's basically a launch tower, and it will hold your rocket so that you're not putting the entire weight of the rocket on a thruster. which could actually break your engine. So we can start off with this. Let's bring this up a little bit. And these are somewhat helpful because instead of starting this low on the ground, you could start this high up, and then you wouldn't have to fly this distance all the way up. You would just start here. So you could do that, but I don't think it would look very good on the launch pad. So I'll just start at 10 here. It just saves a tiny bit of fuel. So we'll launch this rocket and see how it flies. We're probably at about maybe two or 20 minutes in the video, I guess. So I think we'll keep going. So our stages, we didn't set any stages up because I don't want to. I'll demonstrate them next. But stages are basically the order that you want to engage different parts of your rocket. So it counts downward towards 0. So right now, stage 2, you have the detachment of this, and the launch of your engine at the same time. And then you have your decoupler, and then you have your parachute deploying. So when you press spacebar, it will activate the first stage and then go to the next one and so forth every time you press space. We're ready to fly. I'll turn on the SAS, which I did not put one in here, by the way. I'm still using the computer control. And now we have Bob Kerman because Bill died. Although they don't die forever, so they're refreshed into the list of crew members. So you'll see Bill eventually again. So let's begin this. So I did not have enough thrust. I was at 30% and I fell. Now I'm at 60% and I'm still falling. Now at around 80%, I have enough thrust to go upward. So this is about the height that we would have started if I had this all the way extended up, then the stability enhancer. So you see, we're not at high velocity, not as quickly. This is at 67, I'd say probably 80% thrust. So it saves a little bit on rocket fuel. When you are using liquid fuel, it's recommended that you use as low thrust as you can, because then you'll still use the same amount of thrust per velocity you're increasing. So it'll be just as effective as using full throttle, because you'll go just as fast. However, it saves just a tiny bit on fuel, and when you're dealing with large quantities of fuel in interstellar ships, such as if I build an interstellar ship, it'd probably take up maybe 20,000 liquid fuel out of, right here, it's just 180. 20,000 liquid fuel, you probably save maybe 200 liquid fuel by having it lower throttle than full throttle. So if I go to full throttle right now, because I'm not ending up in space, so there's no point in saving on it. So if I go full throttle, it's not much of a difference in acceleration. And it'll keep going up. Still have about a third left fuel. We're at 7 kilometers. We're accelerated to 20 meters per second. I can turn it around. I have complete control over the rocket right now. I can spin it different directions. I can tilt it one way, tilt it another, tilt it to the side, whatever. It doesn't really help much. Although if you're planning on orbiting, if you faced straight upward, you'd end up in an orbit, or you'd end up going to the side slightly because the planet would rotate beneath you, and you'd end up going in this direction in your trajectory if you just went straight up. So it's helpful to lean slightly to this way so that you increase your trajectory laterally, while you're still increasing your height. I'll go into that more detail maybe next episode, maybe later in this episode. So we get up to about 500 meters per second, and now we're halfway into space. And there's the moon. It's pronounced moon, M-U-N. It's kind of a play on words. This planet is not Earth. It's it's called Kerbin, just like Kerbal Space Program, except Kerbin. You can see the stars at around this height. The gravity, I think, is about maybe slightly less. It's not much less. We're about, so we're at 50, it considers this in orbit because you can reach orbit at this height. So, like, you could reach escape velocity at the site. Escape velocity is the amount of velocity required to escape the gravitational pull of a planet and still continue to go. So right now, I am falling because this never reached 0 because I had lateral movement this direction, like this way, and so that contributed to this. So it went down to about 200, and then I had about 200 meters per second of velocity going this way. So it stopped at around 200 and then increased because I'm still going this way and I'm going down. So I should be landing probably right in the ocean, maybe. So I'm still falling, and if I wanted to, I could eject the this debris, and the debris will probably, if you look at it, it's moving slightly this way. So by the time that I fall down, I'll probably end up, it'll probably end up in the water, because that little tiny amount of velocity is still enough to, when it falls, it might push, there's enough time. So the air is pushing on my rocket, making it do this, because if I have the SAS on, it's trying to counteract that, and it's shaking the ship. So this is causing it to do that. So that has, I guess, less air. Its terminal velocity is much higher, so it falls slightly quicker due to the air. I have more air drag on mine than it has on it. So that's going to fall in the ocean. I'm going to fall right on the beach. And at around 500 meters in height, half a kilometer, your parachute will deploy, or will open to... So if I release my parachute now, it just acts as a drag parachute until around 500 meters on planet Kerbin. So this is about to splash down. So that splashed in the water. My parachute opened at 500 meters, and I'll fall at about 6 meters per second till I hit the ground. So I can accelerate time with the period key and decelerate time with the comma key. You can do physical time warp, which is when you're in an atmosphere, you can time warp, or when you're under a certain height, you can time warp while still running the physics engine. When you're in deep space, you can accelerate much faster than 4 times speed. Because otherwise, if you played it at 1 time speed in-game and you flew to the moon, it would take 3 days of real time flying, because it's a 3-day flight to the moon. And if you were doing deep space missions, like flying to another planet in the game, it would take years of real time, which is why you could accelerate by hundreds of thousands of times, which you can do to speed up. But physical time, when you're in deep space, there's not really any physical things the computer has to calculate, so it can run the time warp much faster. However, when you're closer to the surface of planets and moons and satellites, etc., you run physical time warp so that the computer can still run the physical aspects, and it would still run the computer. So I'm gonna turn to the Space Center, So that was a suborbital flight, meaning it did not achieve orbit. Although the computer said it achieved orbit, it was high enough that the computer measured my velocity in terms of my orbital velocity, opposed to compared to ground speed, which it just chose that for that. So when I will eventually be recording multiple sessions in one playthrough. So I might record like 3 episodes in one day. And in that case, I might end the episode abruptly. I might not say, I might not have an ending transition. So it might seem a bit more, I'm not sure, maybe a bit more abrupt. And I may, in fact, show the vehicle, or the construction of the vehicles, rockets, planes, whatever. And I might just end the episode after I build one and then fly the next episode or something like that. Or maybe I'll spend a couple episodes building an interplanetary rocket and then a couple episodes of attempts and achievements of flying it. Although I would have to say there's going to be much less commentary if I do that. So I think I'm going to end the episode here, and I'll see you next time.